Welcome back to Silk Warrant. Today in this story is about the moment a judge read a letter out loud, and my father realized it was written by me.
The judge's voice didn't waver when she read the letter. My father did. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cheap cologne, the same cologne he'd worn every Sunday of my childhood, the same scent that used to mean safety. I was sitting 3 rows back, close enough to see the moment his hands moved to his collar, reaching for a tie that wasn't there. He'd been doing that his whole life, straightening a tie he wasn't wearing whenever the words coming out of his mouth weren't true. I'd watched it at dinner tables, at church pews, at my mother's funeral. I had watched it for 31 years and never said a word. There was a manila envelope in my car. Just like the ones he used to slide birthday cards into when I was 7. I want to tell you what was inside it. My father's name is Gerald. Gerald Hartwell. He built his name the way some men build houses, slowly, with other people's labor, and then put his own sign on the door. He ran a financial advisory firm in suburban Ohio for 22 years. Hartwell Wealth Management. The logo was navy and gold. His face was on a billboard near the highway exit, arms crossed, chin up, the expression of a man who has never once been wrong about money. He was very good at seeming trustworthy. That's not the same thing as being trustworthy, and I didn't understand the difference until I was 26, sitting in his office after hours, asking him to review the paperwork for my first apartment. He'd handed me a folder. I'd handed it back. And in the exchange, a document slid loose from behind his desk blotter and fell to the floor, face up. I almost didn't look at it. I was raised not to look at things that weren't meant for me. In this family, we handle things quietly. That was the phrase he used for everything, when my mother got sick and the bills came. When my uncle drank too much at Thanksgiving. When neighbors asked too many questions. Quietly was the operating principle of our household. And it was enforced not with shouting, but with a very particular kind of silence. The kind that makes you feel small for even thinking there might be something to say. I picked up the document, I read it, and then I put it back exactly where it had fallen, said goodnight, drove home, and threw up in my kitchen sink. The number on that document was not supposed to exist. I need to explain what my father did, because fraud is a word people use the way they use cancer. They know it's bad, but they don't always know what it looks like from the inside. What Gerald did was simple, elegant, even, in the way that quiet, long-running crimes tend to be. He had a subset of clients, older, mostly widowed. Mostly women who'd inherited money from husbands who'd handled the finances. And he was slowly redirecting portions of their portfolios into accounts that technically existed, but practically didn't. Shell accounts. Paper-thin entities with names just credible enough to appear in a quarterly statement without raising flags. The clients trusted him. Some of them had known him for 15 years. One woman, a 74-year-old retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Sims, had been referred to him by her late husband. She called him Gerald, dear, at their annual review meetings. She brought him cookies at Christmas. He had been stealing from her for 9 years. I didn't know Dorothy's name when I found that document. I didn't know any of their names. All I knew was the number, and the way my father had smiled at dinner that same evening, refilling his wine glass and asking me how the apartment search was going. He smiled like a man with nothing to hide. He always had. I lay awake that night with the document in my memory, turning it over and over. I could say something. I could ask him directly. That's what you were supposed to do in a functional family. You raised a concern, you had a conversation, you handled things. Quietly. I already knew how that would end. I'd seen it before. He would explain. He would reassure. He would make me feel foolish for asking, then guilty for doubting, then grateful he wasn't angrier with me. And in 3 days, I'd be sitting at his dinner table again, eating pot roast and feeling like I'd imagined the whole thing. So I didn't say a word. I went back to his office the following Tuesday while he was at a client lunch. I photographed everything I could reach. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit has a tip line. Most people don't know this. I didn't know this. I found it at 2 a.m. on a Thursday after spending 2 weeks trying to decide whether what I'd found was actually what I thought it was. I had a graduate degree in accounting. I knew exactly what it was. The intake process was not like television. Nobody flew out to meet me in a parking garage. There were forms. There were phone calls, calm, careful, procedural phone calls with an agent named Special Agent Reyes, who spoke like someone who had heard everything twice and was still paying attention. She asked me specific questions. She never told me I was brave. She never told me I was doing the right thing. She asked me what I had, how I'd gotten it, and whether I could get more. Can you maintain access to the office? She asked. He trusts me completely, I said. There was a pause, not a long one. Then yes, she said. We'd like to continue this conversation. I want you to understand what the next 14 months looked like. On the surface, I had Sunday dinners with my father every 2 weeks. I helped him pick out a new desk chair. I attended his firm's holiday party and made small talk with his colleagues and ate their shrimp cocktail. I called him on his birthday and sang to him over the phone. Underneath, I was documenting everything, every unusual deposit I could find a paper trail for, every client name that appeared in the wrong column, every time Gerald's assistant, a young man named Craig, looked slightly too long at a file before sliding it into the shredder. I photographed what I could. I notated what I couldn't. I compiled it in a folder on a password-protected external drive that I kept in my glove compartment, inside a manila envelope. The cheap, brown kind. The same ones Gerald used to write happy birthday, sweetheart on in his careful block letters. I chose those envelopes on purpose. I don't know why, some instinct I didn't have a name for yet. At month 8, I called Agent Reyes and asked how the case was going. It's going, she said. You're doing fine, keep going. I kept going. The first thing that almost unraveled everything was not Gerald, it was Craig. Craig Mullen had worked for my father for 6 years. He was 28, slight, wore the same navy blazer every Friday, and had a habit of humming very softly when he was anxious. I'd always thought he was just nervous around me. It took me until month 9 to realize he was nervous because he knew, not everything, but enough. Craig had been filing the documents. He hadn't created the scheme, but his fingerprints were on the paper trail, which meant he either stayed quiet or he went down with Gerald. He had chosen quiet. And then, at a family dinner in March, Gerald's birthday dinner, actually steak and red wine. Gerald telling the same story about a fishing trip he'd taken 30 years ago. Craig called me from outside the restaurant while I was getting something from my car. I know what you've been doing, he said. The parking lot smelled like rain and asphalt. I stood very still. I don't know what you mean, I said. Yes, you do. His voice was low and flat. I'm not going to say anything. I need you to know that I'm not going to say anything. A long pause. I have a daughter, he said. She's 3. I didn't say anything back. I put my phone in my pocket and went back inside and ate steak and listened to the fishing story and laughed in the right places. But when I got home that night, I called Agent Reyes. He won't be a problem, she said after I'd explained. We know about Craig. He's been cooperating separately for 4 months. I sat with that for a moment. Quiet doesn't always mean what you think it means. The indictment came down on a Tuesday in November. Gerald Hartwell, 63, of Dublin, Ohio, was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement totaling just over $4.2 million across 11 clients spanning 9 years. Dorothy Sims had lost $380,000. I found that out from a court document, sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the FBI field office, holding a latte that had gone cold while I read. Dorothy Sims, retired schoolteacher. Husband deceased, 2 adult children, 9 years. My father had sat across from her once a year, every year, and looked her in the eye. And then he'd called me afterward, driving home, and asked what I was making for dinner and whether I'd seen the game on Sunday. I want to be very clear about something. I did not feel victorious in that coffee shop. I did not feel vindicated. I felt the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time, and finally being allowed to set it down. Except when you set it down, you realize how much of your posture had changed to accommodate the wait. The trial prep took 6 more months. I was still unnamed at this point. Gerald knew he had been caught, and he had a very good lawyer, and his strategy, his tell showing up in every motion, was to blame a software error, a rogue employee, a systemic failure in oversight. Anything but himself. He didn't know about me. He didn't know there was a me to know about. He still called me on Sundays. I still answered. "This is a witch hunt," he told me, one Sunday in February. "You know how I've run that business. You know the kind of man I am." "I know," I said. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday morning in May. Federal courtrooms have a specific quality of light, institutional, flat, giving nothing warmth. I arrived early. Gerald arrived with his lawyer and his 2 college friends who'd driven in from Pittsburgh. Men with gray hair and good suits who nodded at each other with the gravity of people bearing witness to an injustice. My father didn't see me sit down. I was in the 3rd row. He was facing forward. In federal sentencing, the judge may read victim impact statements and character letters into the record. The prosecution had submitted several. The defense had submitted several more, from colleagues, from a former mayor, from a man who coached Gerald's recreational soccer team in the 90s. And then the judge said, "The court will now read a letter submitted by a cooperating individual who has asked to remain unnamed." Gerald's lawyer shuffled his papers. Gerald adjusted himself in his seat. His hands moved to his collar. There was nothing there. The judge read the letter. I had written it 6 weeks earlier, in my kitchen, at midnight, with a cup of tea that also went cold. I had written it 7 times before I wrote the version she read aloud. It was 4 pages. It was very precise. It described, in specific detail, what it felt like to grow up in a house where silence was a weapon masquerading as virtue. It described what I had found, and when, and why I hadn't said a word to anyone for 14 months. It described Dorothy Sims, not her case file, but the version of her I had constructed from court documents and imagined into fullness. A woman who'd trusted the wrong person for the exact same reason I had for 31 years. Because he was good at seeming trustworthy, I watched my father from the 3rd row. He went very still about halfway through. The kind of still that isn't calm, it's the stillness of a person whose mind is moving very fast in one direction, running calculations, trying to find the exit. There was no exit. When the judge finished reading, the courtroom was quiet. My father turned not to his lawyer, not to his friends, but slowly, by some instinct I will never be able to explain, directly to the 3rd row. Our eyes met. I did not look away. Gerald Hartwell was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.2 million in restitution. He will be eligible for release when he is 70. His lawyer filed an appeal within 90 days. It was denied. Dorothy Sims' daughter sent a letter to the victim advocate's office, which was forwarded to Agent Ray's, which was forwarded to me. It was 3 sentences. It said, "Thank you. My mother had given up trying to understand what happened. She can rest now." I drove home from the courthouse the same way I'd driven to it. Past the highway exit, past the billboard that had already been taken down, the navy and gold gone. Just a blank white rectangle in the gray Ohio sky. My father's firm closed before the trial ended. Craig cooperated fully and received a reduced sentence. He went home to his daughter. I have not spoken to Gerald since the day he turned around in that courtroom. I don't know if I ever will. That's not a decision I've made. It's a door I'm leaving closed for now, because some doors require a different version of you to open them than the version you currently are. The manila envelope is still in my glove compartment. I've thought about taking it out. I always leave it there. It's not carrying anything anymore, but some objects earn the right to stay. Here is what I know now, that I didn't know the night I found that document on my father's office floor. Silence has 2 versions. There is the silence that protects you, and the silence that protects the person who taught you to be quiet. For a very long time, I confused them. I thought staying calm, staying still, and saying nothing was a form of dignity. And maybe sometimes it is. But it can also be a performance of loyalty to someone who has never once earned it, worn so long it starts to feel like your own skin. I am not the woman who grew up in that house. I am not even the woman who sat in the third row. I am something that took 31 years, 14 months, a blank white billboard, and a letter read aloud in a room full of strangers to become. I don't have a word for her yet, but she answers the phone on Sundays, and it's a different phone now, and no one on the other end of it is lying. You were right about one thing, Gerald. In this family, we handle things quietly. You were wrong about everything else. If the people closest to you defined you, would they see the real you or the version you learned to perform?